Members, we're just coming up to 9 o'clock. Will you take your seats, please? Oh, yes. Members, before we start, Councillor Burton asked if I would give his apologies. He has an early start tomorrow morning, and yes, but I'm not going to say exactly why, but he's got an exceptionally early start tomorrow morning. I've been quite laid back about how long this last item took, probably allowing people to speak longer than they should. I think we would all like to get away at a reasonable time, so I don't want to curtail debate, but I would ask people to be brief, please, and not repeat what other people have said. It would be very helpful. So could we move to agenda item 12, please, which is the key performance indicator update. You'll find it on pages 9 to 18. And Mrs Woodhouse, would you lead us in, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So 75% of the reported key performance indicators have achieved the target for quarter two, with only one indicator at red and two at amber. The target for clearing fly tips within 2 working days was missed by just over 10% in quarter two, and the reasons for this are outlined in the report. Positive areas of performance include levels of litter and detritus, recycling levels, and the number of fly tips with evidential value resulting in enforcement action. Footfall on the high street continues to exceed the target set and last year's performance. Areas where targets were just missed were the number of households housed through the housing register, which was only missed by 3, and the processing of minor planning applications, which also fell short of the target, and there was a drop in performance. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Blackmore.
Just one simple question. I see we've got a single red rating. You mentioned in the report that there are technical issues associated with clearing fly tips. What do you mean by technical issues? Our vehicles don't work or you can't find the sites? Just out of interest. Thank you.
No, it was with mobile technology. It was actually closing them down. So a lot of those would have actually been collected within the 2 working days, but there was a little bit of a glitch of actually closing them down. So when it registered so when we run our report. However, it's a simple app update that enables us to then for that to work.
Councillor Firmer.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your report. I just had a quick question regarding acceptable levels of detritus. So I've had a lot of queries recently about kind of verges and overgrowth and detritus and things like that. And I wondered whether it was because that was KCC responsibility and whether, or in some cases, obviously you can't tell me every road that's an NBC responsibility, but I wondered, I just was concerned that residents might see the kind of 91% and be unhappy in their area that isn't really the case they experience, and how perhaps we can better convey, I don't know, roads that we can do things about and roads that we can't do things about, and that kind of tussle that I'm sure many of us have many problems with when we contact the office on a regular basis.
Yes, obviously detritus is the broken down leaf matter, so actually leaves or anything like that or overgrowth isn't classed as detritus, so won't be obviously recorded within that indicator. It is purely that broken down matter where you see it sort of gathering in the gullies that is our responsibility to sweep. So most of that will be our responsibility, but what obviously you're covering is the fact that there may be grass cutting is reduced on KCC verges, which does mean that when it does get cut, there is more material left lying around that does then fall into the gutters, then rots, and then it's our responsibility. So it is a very complicated matter, and there are bits that obviously we need to work with KCC, and we are improving that sort of relationship to make sure we are going behind their grass cutters and that type of thing, or going straight before to do the litter. So it's quite complex, but we are working with them.
Quickly, thank you. So any detritus is our responsibility. So even if KCC do the weed killing, we then have to go around behind them and clear the kind of broken down weeds, basically.
Yep, so with weeds, living weeds are KCC's responsibility, dead weeds are our responsibility. And therefore, we have special brushes on our machinery to basically rip out the dead weeds.
It's very tempting to say, what do you do when they're on the way out, but not quite there. Councillor Harper. Yes.
Well, that explanation it follows, doesn't it? Because we're the cemetery and funeral authority for the area, so I suppose dead vegetation falls into that. Just to speed things up, I was going to move the recommendation that the report be noted.
I would just like to say that when you look at this, because I love the percentage and it says how much it is, how many planning things wasn't done? There seems to be a very, very vague figure. We can pick on the waste, but other people were just happy to say it wasn't met. So all I'm saying is I think that's very unfair, very unfair. But I would also like to say well done for picking up like you have on the team at the depot. I think they've done very well. They've had lots of changes again. And I'd just like to say thank you very much, and could you pass it on to your team? Thank you.
So we move on to item 13 on pages 19 to 39. Mr Green, it's the second quarter budget monitoring. If you'd lead us in, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The position at the end of the second quarter is a projected underspend for the year of 292,000. That's positive news. That is just a projection, though, so there remains a risk of unforeseen events for the remainder of the year. And that overall underspend of 292,000 is made up of overspends and underspends. Details are on pages 22 to 26. We're ahead of budget on commercial investment income, parks and open spaces and parking income. We've still got overspends on development control appeals and homelessness, although homelessness we are making progress in reducing the overspend there. The report also deals with the capital programme. Details are in Appendix 2 on page 37, and the main things to highlight there is that there's been some slippage, particularly on the High Street regeneration scheme, but we have spent ahead of budget on commercial investments. As members know, we've taken advantage of a couple of opportunities so far this year to acquire more commercial property. I won't go into detail on the rest of the report, just to say that it covers reserves. I must apologise, on page 28, the column on the right-hand side should be headed 31st of March 2018, being the end of the current financial year. The report also deals with the collection fund, how we're doing on collecting business rates and council tax. We're ahead of projections on business rates, but not quite achieving our target on council tax. You're asked to agree the write-off of some business rates. This is where we have really exhausted all the possibilities for recovering business rates outstanding. And finally, the report gives an update on Treasury management and sets out the position on the cash balances that we hold as at the end of the 6 months. Happy to take any questions that members may have on the report.
Councillor McLaughlin, you were first.
Thank you, Chair. I just have two. Paragraph 2.4 on page 21. At this time, the budget is reporting an underspend of £2.5 million, which seems an extraordinary amount to have underspent in 6 months. You then go on to say a significant proportion of this relates to rent allowances, and I don't actually understand, forgive me, what rent allowances are. So that's my first question. And the second one is easy, because on page 36, Appendix 1, the middle and bottom tables seem to be showing a year-end forecast, which are actually the budget figures. And therefore, the variance presumably is correct, but I just question what the year-end forecast should be in those columns. If you might just comment on that, Mr. Green. if you understand my point. Okay, thanks. That's all.
Yes, on the second question first, I do apologise. The figures are correct in the table at the top, and it looks as though the wrong figure may have been picked up in the year-end forecast column in the second and third tables. But I do reiterate that projection for the year-end is a 292,000 underspend. And going back to your first question on paragraph 2.4, the spend on allowances, rent allowances, is massive. We're talking 50 million or so a year. So it doesn't take an awful lot in the way of timing differences to throw things out. For example, if we've recovered more in the amounts that we reclaim from government for rent allowances compared with what we've paid out. So that's more in the nature of a timing difference, and the focus should be on the projected year-end position, which I've already discussed.
May I just clarify, is that housing rent allowances that the government are paying us and we're passing on? Okay, thanks.
Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's good that we've got a projected underspend at the moment, but obviously we've got the big volatility which we can't control around housing. And whilst housing, the figures seem to move favourably at the moment, it doesn't take anything for it to suddenly go the other way, as has happened the last few years. But I just had a question on page 37, which is the capital programme. And I just wondered if the slippage in heritage, culture and leisure, because there seems to be a lot of the schemes there have slipped, is that down to staffing vacancies earlier in the year? Because I know in the Parks Department they've had quite a lot of vacancies. I wonder if that might be a contributing factor. And I just wonder if you perhaps could just explain to me, under policy and resources, which is our area, acquisition of commercial assets, where we're showing slippage of -2 million pounds. Could you just explain to me how we got -2 million pounds slippage? Thanks.
Yes, two parts to that question. One is on heritage, culture and leisure, where I think this was also covered at the last occasion that the budget monitoring report was brought to this committee, where they've not spent up to their capital programme budget for the year. I don't think it's specifically to do with staff shortage, it's more about the programming of the capital works. On the acquisition of commercial assets, it's not slippage, it's the opposite of slippage. We've had the opportunities to acquire 2 new properties, and we've taken advantage of that. But because of the slippage elsewhere in the programme, we're able to accommodate that spending ahead of budget, if you like. If you look at the overall position, we've still got a net slippage. So we've underspent on a number of things, including heritage, culture and leisure, but we've overspent for the year on commercial investments. But overall, we still don't expect to spend the whole budgeted capital programme figure for the year.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one quick question. It relates to development control appeals. We've still got the same figure showing as we did last time round. And bearing in mind we're a little bit further on, and you still refer to the fact that there are inquiries out there, do you have any idea as to how large that figure will grow, or indeed if it will shrink shortly and disappear completely, which would be amazing? But I am a realist, so what's the downside, Mr Green?
We do look at this figure every quarter, and there's nothing that's happened in the last 3 months to change the projected outturn. Obviously, the things that could lead to a change haven't materialised. If, for example, an appeal had been concluded, that would allow us to come up with the actual figure. There's nothing that's happened to change the projections on development control appeals. You may remember at the last meeting, SPS&T were asked to look at the position with development control appeals, and what's come out of that is a request for a report looking at the history of planning appeals over the past 5 years, to look at where the outcome has been from decisions made contrary to officer advice, how much of overspends were attributable to that, how much were attributable to other causes. So there will be further information going to SPS&T in response to this committee's request that they address themselves to that issue. So basically watch this space, there will be more information.
Yeah. So in other words, all the things that were out there before are still there. Nothing's gone away or disappeared or fallen off the horizon. No. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just under development control, it's got parking services, and it says here that there's an adverse variance here caused by a backlog. Could we just have some assurance that's being dealt with and that we can expect to see more accurate figures on this next time, please?
Yeah, I understand that the issue there was about staffing. There were staff off, so they weren't dealing with appeals against parking offences promptly, but I understand that they are now catching up.
And Councillor English.
I think we will quite soon know where we're going, broadly speaking, with development control. The notification for the large appeal for the school has just come in. We haven't got the hearing date yet, but notice that the process has just started. Several key planning decisions are going to be made in the next couple of weeks, so we will soon know. But I would say that one reason we haven't had feedback is because of the huge amount of last planning committee agenda. It was not possible for planning committee to actually yet discuss the reference, and we will be doing so when we can. We haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Thank you for that. I have nobody else indicating. You'll find the recommendations on page 19. Can I ask you just to note 1, 2, 3 and 5? Are they noted? And from the chair, I'm going to move that the write-off of unpaid business rates as set out in Appendix 3 is approved. Is that seconded anywhere? Thank you, Councillor Harper. You were there first. Could I have a show of hands, please? Is that approved? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. We move swiftly on. Yes, we move swiftly on then to item 14, which is the charging policy on page 40 to 55. Mr. Green again. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is updating the existing charging policy, which goes back over 5 years, and this new version of the policy is brought to you for a couple of reasons. First of all, because the old policy had quite a lot of wording that was out of date, references to cabinet and so on. But also, the policy that's attached as Appendix 1 to this report gives more focus to use of charging policy in a constructive way. For example, on page 46, where we state that fees and charges should maximise cost recovery and, where appropriate, income generation. So it's reflecting a more proactive approach with charging policy. Obviously, there are a lot of constraints and all the things that we need to consider when we're setting fees and charges. But the idea of the policy is to give officers the flexibility and encouragement to use them in a positive way to generate income. So it's doing those two things. It's bringing the policy up to date to reflect the current governance structure of the council, and it's providing a framework that allows us to maximise income within our governance framework. Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
I vaguely recall there was going to be a loosening in connection with planning fees, and we might have had the ability to charge more for certain plans. It's all a bit vague, so I apologise for being vague. Do I take it that that is all built into this, bearing in mind that's a new thing on the horizon, or is this just what we've got in front of us at the moment?
With the planning fees, you may be referring to the fact that the government was proposing to allow planning fees to be increased by 20%, and that was delayed by the general election. But I understand that the necessary legislation has now been laid before the House of Commons, so it should be implemented very shortly. But that's something that's set by statute, so we don't have the flexibility where this policy would apply.
Councillor Ring.
Sorry, Mark, I'd just like to check. The list looks good, and I think that's good for managers, isn't it, to see a list like that. It's straightforward, yes or no, this we can do, that we can't do. But I hear things like putting up the green bins to more money, etc., etc. So where would this come back to councillors to say, I really don't think that's going to work out with the public? You know, I'd sooner put £10 on and, you know, not have them say, well, I ain't going to use it no more, I'm not going to use it no more, because I'm just using that as an example. So there is space in this policy, and after this has gone through between yous and your managers, for where we would pick up on this as councillors.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ring. This is setting the overall policy. As in the past, we will come back to individual service committees with recommendations about specific fees and charges. So, as usual, at the January meetings of the service committees, or either December or January, you'll see a report with proposals for the fees and charges for those particular committees. So this is just the overall framework. The detail will be considered by members in a later date.
Councillor McLaughlin.
I think it's a very succinct policy, well worded, easy to understand, and I'd like to move that the recommendation on the report, that we approve it.
Councillor Harvey indicated to second that before anybody else. So that's moved and seconded. Could I have a show of hands? Members, we're going to move to agenda item 15, which is the Mid-Kent Services Board appointment options. But before we do, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. William Tate. Some of you will remember Oliver. And Mr. Tate has taken over from Oliver as our Mid-Kent Services Support Officer. So, William, without more ado, welcome on board. And if you'd like to lead us into this report, please. You'll find it on pages 52.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. In essence, this report considers whether the recommendation of the MKS Board to add one additional member to the MKS Board, whether to accept that recommendation. The Board's aims in making this recommendation was to improve the future resilience of the Partnership's political leadership. The report further considers which mechanism should be used to fill the post, whether that be Leader's Choice, Committee's Choice, Vice Chairman of Policy and Resources, or Deputy Leader. It recommends the position is filled by Leader's Choice. I would be happy to take any questions.
Councillor Harper.
Sorry. Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment to the recommendation. And the amendment is that the second person be the deputy leader of the council, and in absence of either the leader or the deputy leader, the vice chair of plans, policy and resources is a substitute.
by Councillor Ring. Which does anybody wish to speak, or shall we move straight? So, right, I do need a show of hands because it's. So, can I? Those in favour of that? That is unanimous. My goodness gracious me. Now we move to the substantive. That becomes the substantive. Unless any, no, please could I have a show of hands for those in agreement? That again is unanimous. Hang on, who didn't have their hand? Right, okay. Councillor McLaughlin, are you?
I beg your pardon. I wasn't quite sure what we were voting on. So consider me an abstention. I won't be hurt.
Councillor McLaughlin, I don't mind taking the substantive again because I believe you did put your hand up to the amendment. So
I did. Okay then.
So can I just have the show of hands again, please, members? Thank you. Thank you. That's Members, I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the items set out in Part 2 of the agenda because of the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified, having applied the public interest test. Can I ask you to make sure all the microphones are switched off?